Good afternoon and welcome to our lunchtime book launch of Shane O'Toole's new collection of essays, 99 Tesserae from Architecture, with Charlotte Sheridan, Emmett, Scanlon, and of course the author himself, Shane O'Toole. My name is Sandra O'Connell. I'm Director of Architecture and Communications at the RIAI, and I will take you through this event. Before I introduce our speakers, a few words about this event and the format. We are delighted to bring you our first RIAI book launch of 2022, and we hope there will be many more to follow and that you will see us, that you will visit us soon again in our bookshop in Merrion Square, which has remained open throughout the refurbishment. I would like to extend a sincere thank you to the publisher, Karl Krämer Verlag Stuttgart, who has granted the RIAI Bookshop sole agency for sales, which allows us that €5 from every book bought will go to the IABS and another €5 to the Irish Architectural Archive. So please buy this book. It is a truly beautiful collection of essays that can be read either in Shane's carefully crafted sequence or by just delving in and choosing a topic, a building, or an architect. Many of the big moments of Irish architecture are represented here, but Shane also takes us down some less traveled roads on a journey of rediscovery and reappraisal. It is easy to get absorbed in this book and its beautiful writing, starting with Shane's poetic titles. For example, Unmarked and Abandoned Ground is one of my favorites. The format of our book launch is as follows. First, we will have a welcome and introduction from RIAI President Charlotte Sheridan. Then Shane O'Toole would like to say a few acknowledgements. Emmett Scanlon will then share insights and highlights from his reading of 99 Tesserae from Architecture. Having discussed the collection thus far, we would like to have a conversation and a Q&A with you, our audience. Please post your questions and comments into the Q&A at any time during this launch. We hope to get as many questions as we can, and we will conclude the event at 2 p.m. The event is also being recorded for our archive. And now to our speakers. Our first speaker is Charlotte Sheridan, our RIAI President for 2022 and 2023. Charlotte is a registered architect and town planner with over 20 years professional experience as a director of Sheridan Woods, an architecture and urban planning practice. A passionate advocate for quality-led plans for towns, villages, and urban neighborhoods, Charlotte has specialized in urban regeneration, housing, sustainable communities, and collaborative planning in towns and cities in Ireland. She was elected to the RIAI Council in 2018 and appointed Honorary Secretary for 2019 and 2020. She is a non-executive director and board member of the RIAI since 2019, and also a member of the Irish Planning Institute and a board member of NAMA since 2020. Emmett Scanlon, our second speaker, is an architect, writer, and the host and producer of the architecture podcast, What Buildings Do. He is editor of Story Building, a new journal of architecture in Ireland to be published in 2022. Emmett is program director of the Master of Architecture at University College Dublin and was awarded a University Teaching Excellence Award in 2020. In 2018, he was assistant to the curators for the 6th Biennale Architectura Free Space under Grafton Architects, and his spatial practice includes exhibitions, public art, and production design. And now on to our author and distinguished honorary member of the RIAI, Shane O'Toole. He needs hardly any introduction, but here are some of the many achievements over a distinguished career. Shane is an award-winning architectural critic. A graduate in architecture from UCD, he is current adjunct associate professor at the UCD School of Architecture. An honorary member of the RIAI and the AAI, he has served the profession as president of the AAI, vice president of the RIAI, inaugural director of the Irish Architecture Foundation, commissioner for the Venice Biennale, and jury member of the Mies van der Rohe Award. He co-founded Docomomo International and Docomomo Ireland, and was until recently chairman of the Irish Architectural Archives Collections Development Committee, of which he remains a member. He was a founder member of Group 91 Architects. He reintroduced the Downs Medal as the AAI's premier Award and established its annual International Critics Lecture Program. Shane has co-edited monographs on Kevin Roach and Aldo Rossi and curated exhibitions on Michael Scott, Liam McCormick, and Noel Moffat, amongst others. He contributed to the pilot inventory of 20th century architecture in Dublin. He wrote for the Sunday Times for 10 years. A member of the SICA, the International Committee of Architecture Critics, he was named International Building Press Architecture Writer in 2008, 2009, and 2010, and most recently won the Pierre Vago Journalism Award in 2020. That is an incredible biography to read out here. But please now welcome our first speaker, Charlotte Sheridan.
Thank you. Sorry, excuse me. Thank you very much, Sandra, and thank you for that introduction. And good afternoon all, and thank you very much for joining us on this very special occasion of the launch of Shane O'Toole's 99 Tesserae from Architecture. This follows the original launch of 101 Hosannas by my predecessor, Carl Pollard, in 2017, after Shane was elected Honorary Fellow of the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland. And it's a particular honour and privilege for me in my new role as president. And it gives me great optimism to reflect on our profession's legacy and our role in the design and creation of beautiful buildings and places then and into the future. This is a really significant and important collection of essays that brings together a body of work that spans more than 3 decades, beginning with the RIAI's 150th anniversary and exhibition of that year in 1989. The Architect and the Drawing 150 Years of RIAI Members Work essay points to this. 33 years on from when The Joy of Drawing was written, Shane has been a consistent, influential and vital voice in Irish architecture, receiving many awards as noted by Sandra, which are a reflection and recognition of your skills, Shane. This collection is an invaluable chronicle of Irish architecture during an unprecedented period of activity, and it documents our profession and our achievements at a local level through to our rise to world recognition, spanning from pre-Group 91 to the Grafton's Royal Gold Medal. And it's in that early essay, The Joy of Drawing, that we're reminded of our principal means of communication with the client and the builder through the use of drawings. And it serves every phase of that process, from concept sketches to presentation and working drawings. And it's interesting too, in the way in which we use drawings as a medium to analyse and record our observations, or as described in the essay as drawing from life. And it's this drawing from life that characterises the essays that follow. As noted by Hugh Campbell in the prologue, Shane's observations, record and analysis is truthful, useful and right. We're given the facts, a description of the context, including the social, cultural, economic, political and physical context, and the achievements are elucidated, revealed and interpreted so that they're accessible and also easily understood. And as such, we have a really invaluable resource of lessons learned that were not only important to document then to be of historical interest, but they also continue to be relevant today. And it's timely that we look back and see where they can inform us now. Housing and housing solutions permeate the entire collection, as well as regeneration and infrastructure planning at the city and town level, as well as consideration of how we procure projects to ensure that we get the best outcomes in terms of value and quality. And the projects cited hold many solutions to the current crisis and the role that architecture and the profession can make in creating place-based solutions and sustainable communities. We're reminded of the Temple Bar Framework Plan by Group 91 at the city scale in Essay 10, a new definition of urbanity, and of residential development approaches in Dunmanway by Neil Hegarty, Castle Park in Kinsale by Diamond, Redfern, Anderson, and Ashgrove in the Coombe by Delaney, McVeigh and Pike, which is described by Jerry Cahill as an example of architecture's return to the street. And these intuitive and creative approaches to bringing life back to city centres and town centres are as relevant today. We're reminded too of the value and importance of the government's policy on architecture, now more than ever at a point when we can anticipate further growth and as we endeavour to meet our housing needs and climate action. Essay 57, Where We Are Now, an address delivered on the occasion of the launch of the Government Policy on Architecture report in 2011 is noteworthy. In this essay, it's noted that the culture of architecture cannot be built by architects alone, and the culture of architecture can and only becomes part of the broader culture when written and talked about by others. Architecture and the social value of architecture and enhanced quality of life that it can bring to society should be a basic expectation. And this cultural shift can only really be brought about from the top down, where architecture and the value of architecture is embedded in policy at all levels and talked about by all. And in that context, we look forward to the publication of the government's policy on architecture and in ensuring its implementation. And we also look forward to your observations too, Shane. So Shane, it's an absolute honour to launch this publication, and I want to thank you most sincerely on my own behalf and on behalf of the RIAI for your unwavering commitment to the profession and the service you have given us, and also to society as an advocate for best practice. I look forward to hearing your plans for the future and to continue to hear your wise and informed observations and contributions on architecture and life. I'll hand you over now to Shane. Thank you very much.
Well, Charlotte, thank you so much. I don't quite know what to say, but I have to make some acknowledgements. I have to thank some people. First of all, obviously, I have to thank the RIAI for organizing this event. I mean, it's a wonderful way to launch the book, even better, I think, than in the flesh, because people don't have to travel to Dublin to join us, and that's wonderful. And Charlotte, as president, I mean, I know this is your first public engagement, and man, that's an incredible honor that you've bestowed on me to do this here today. My publisher, Carl Kramer Verlag, Carl Kramer of Carl Kramer Verlag, can't join us, unfortunately, today because he's recovering from illness. But I'd like to send a greeting to Carl, if I may. Hallo Carl, mein alter und lieber Freund. Ich grüße und danke für alles. Wir hatten ein paar wirklich denkwürdige Tage zusammen in Stuttgart. Feines Essen und feinste Weine. Ich rauche, wenn ich es nicht sollte, während ich Zeitschriften redigiere. Aber mit ihrer nachsichtigen Komplizenschaft, wie mutige Jungs zusammen in ihrem Büro, über all die großartigen Bücher, die sie sprechen, veröffentlicht und die alten Jungs, das sie kannten. Das war ein besonderes Geschenk, das du mir damals gemacht hast. Eine Einsicht, viel mehr als eine einfache Freundschaft. Das werde ich nie vergessen, mein Onkel in der Architektur. Danke nochmal für das wunderbare Geschenk dieses Buches. Ich wünsche Ihnen beiden, Ihnen und Gudrun, das Allerbesten für die Gesundheit des großen Karl und sende Ihnen heute alles Liebe und Gute aus Irland nach Stuttgart. Thank you, Carl, and get well soon, please. I'd also like to thank, of course, my designers, Zero G, Kieran O'Guera and Louise Brady, who gave wonderful form to my words. So thank you, Kieran, thank you, Louise. And the book would not have been possible without my sponsors, who are the same sponsors of the last volume, 101 Hosannas, Tegral, formerly Tegral, now eTex Ireland, Arup, and the RIAI, of course. So thank you sincerely from the bottom of my heart for making this book possible. My real thanks, I guess, is extended to you who've turned up today and to the readers of the book, because without the readers, it's all a pointless exercise. So I thank you deeply. And finally, my gratitude goes to Emmett, who has really kindly agreed to send these words out into the world today. So thank you, Emmett.
Thank you, Shane, and thank you, Sandra and Charlotte. We're using the word honor a lot today, but it really, truly is an honor to be here and to participate in this event with Shane. If I at any time get emotional, it's because I am. It's a really special occasion to be here with you on the launch of this book. And what I've tried to do is put down on paper, for the record, some things I think Shane has done, things that Shane has influenced. And I suppose it's as simple as that, really. The piece that I've written is called 1,699 Words for a Man of Architecture. Down from my shelf, I take a book. it is sometimes impossible being an architect, or wonderful. Either way, after a time, you start to look for architecture everywhere and in everything. And so it is with books. The book I now hold is but a span of my hand. I can hold it like a flat black brick, embossed in silver into a thick, tight, tactile cover. My fingers slide and hop between each of the distinct and imperfect shapes that wrap front and back, counting, gathering those 99 tesseraes of the title toward me. This is the new book by Ireland's Shane O'Toole. First, and perhaps most obvious to this architect looking for architecture, is the design and assembly of these cover tesserae resemble a floor of silver tiles laid side by side. They are what we call specials, crafted, slightly different, of real individual value and intrigue, yes, yet somehow, as things, they realize their true useful potential only when placed side by side. In situ in this book, it's just like that, a series of individually beautifully paced essays, particular, distinct, each focused on a moment or a building or an event or an individual who have played some critical part in the recent history and cultural production of architecture in Ireland and abroad. While all 99 stories gathered here from previous outings in newspapers, with all 99 stories gathered here from previous outings in newspapers, books, speeches, blogs, and more, Shane O'Toole's work finds robust strength in its known numbers. Organized in time from earliest to latest, from an essay, as Charlotte mentioned, about drawing in 1989, to Shane's recent dedication to architect John Marr in 2021. The effect of the gathering of this collection is not to insist on a forced, singular, reductive, or didactic point of view, but rather the assembly of a map of recent architecture in and of and about Ireland. These are the kind of essays you do not need to read in order. I expect each of us will chart our own course through, resting to engage with the familiar, such as Apocalypse Now on Architecture Post-Celtic Tiger from 2009, or the forgotten, The Rebuilding the Republic from 2011, when Shane assembled a recent history of Irish architecture from the annals of the AAI Awards. Moving through the works in this way, readers are invited to make and remake their own connections, to live and relive history, not as something consigned to the static past, but something which continues to have influence on our evolving, contingent architectural present. I read this cover too like a black wall with a series of shuffling silver gelatin portraits lightly pilled upon it. These are portraits, though, without pictures. No photographs or drawings or sketches accompany the essays. For a book on architecture in 2021, this is brave, though I suspect pragmatic too. But to make a book without images is to ignite the imagination in another way, to commend these reviews and views of architecture to a state where the mind is active and engaged. The reader is not only reading, they are participating, getting a glimpse perhaps of how Shane O'Toole reads the world and joins his own dots. The silver too reminds me of a mirror, but not the shiny front face, but the back, behind the glass where the magic happens. Shane O'Toole is standing behind each essay, and as he holds each mirrored tesserae towards us, he is inviting us to look into the frame his words provide and to see ourselves individually, collectively, reflected back. But this is not vanity or some beauty parade, as these silver tiles also act as looking glasses, each essay a device through which we must examine, we must scrutinize and confront, take responsibility, and for many of us, to take the criticism. Here is revealed a true role of the critic, not simply to review or to confirm what they like or they don't, to list what is hot and what's not. Rather, a critic's mission, as Michael Sorkin has said, is to help vet the instigation of the social and formal parameters of building. Writing, working alone, as is the life of a critic, Shane O'Toole's labor has not been to write a hit, but to write an essay, and another, and another, and another more. In architecture, he has been a critic of worth because he has been rather regularly concerned not only with the event, but with its causes and with its effects. I suspect that taken together for the author, this collection is also an act of resistance against a contemporary culture in which essential writing and criticism are often not commissioned or are too easily forgotten or discarded, as editors bow down to the thrall of the novel and the new, or are forced to sate our click-click appetite with the binary and the build. Instead, within this book, we find no broken links, but page after page of words printed on paper so thin you see the next story headed your way before you can even turn the page. It's then that I realized that these tesserae are not a floor, but actually a rug, unfurled, laid out, a device repeatedly employed by Shane O'Toole to invite architecture to attend and to be attended to, especially the buildings and the architects, which at times got literally no attention elsewhere. In his praise for the sister book to this one, 101 Hosannas for Architecture, Hugh Campbell considered words to describe Shane. He wrote, "He is variously critic, historian, advocate, reader, confessor, champion, campaigner, visionary." I would like to add one more, helpfully omitted from that list: architect. You see, Shane O'Toole is simply one of Ireland's greatest architects. Architecture is not only found in buildings, and an architect can reasonably tend to architecture in many other ways. It is perhaps a debate for another day, but let us agree here that architects like to be part of the action when things get built. And Shane has been part of the action when much of Ireland has been built. Of course, he has designed and built things too, but I think that over the decades, Shane has been busy building foundations upon which I and others who desired to write about architecture have been inspired to stand. And in as much as the 99 Tesserae stand side by side and together, and on this cover too, there is also space between them, gaps, cracks, which I think reflect the space he has both made and created for others to simply step in by giving writing about architecture a good name, home and away. Shane is utterly unique in that he has enough knowledge of the world of architecture off the island to be truly credible in demanding more from the architects still on it. And such is Shane's skill in noticing, linking and grounding the work here in some larger conversation in architecture beyond the island, that he has become a relentless, trusted advocate and ally in many quiet rooms when far from home. The gaps on the cover too, though, offer some sense of the real and present cracks in our own critical infrastructure here in Ireland. These essays must not be confined to some nostalgic history, inasmuch as by coming out together in this volume, they make apparent the fact that today there is little critical discussion in any national newspaper in Ireland tending to the social or cultural aspects of contemporary architecture across the kitchen table. Today, architecture, despite many of its successes, feels cut adrift as a social and cultural force. It is a topic explicitly and wonderfully addressed in Shane's essay from 2021, Identity Check, written first for the Architectural Review. In it, Shane puts down in black and white that the critical culture of Irish architecture is in peril, reminding the profession of the failure to advocate for itself, pleading that the threat of the lifeblood of the profession must be faced down in both parts of the island if the newfound global reputation of Irish architecture is to survive, let alone prosper. The subtitle of this book is An Elegy of Fragments from Life in the Field. Although this book charts the unique and remarkable story of this little island, north and south, its architectural ambition and success, our wonderful capacity as a people to be unusually comfortable leading at the center of it all, while enjoying getting away with it, being peripheral at the edges, these essays remind us that a culture of architecture is a fragile thing. Many of the essays from this 33-year period, those that touch on how architects simply get to do work, of the rather bizarre rejection of the public realm, of quality, of the need of political leadership and policies with teeth, of the need for local and national champions and architects who themselves advocate for each other. These are issues of those days, but also of my day, of yours, of this day. This perhaps is part of the elegy, a lament from the field for ground lost, And this collection and the occasion invites us to stop and reflect and gather strength so that together we can chart another path forward. In 2020, Shane was invited to write a letter of advice to a young architect as part of a series in the Architectural Review. The advice read, "Choose your apprenticeships with care, but choose your friends with more. You will advance through life together. Make colleagues of artists of different shapes, and of dead architects who will become your whispering shadows from history. Read widely on architecture, but even more fiction and poetry. Keep a sketchbook in your pocket, but don't just draw your work, write it too. You'll be surprised at what you discover. Travel far and wide, but slowly, and smile as much and as often as you can. Kindness goes a long way." In that piece too, Shane cites Gio Ponti, who declared all that is needed is to love architecture. I have no doubt that Shane O'Toole has loved it for 4 decades. Most architects do. But love is fickle, it's fleeting, it's dramatic, it's corruptible. More than love, as per his own advice, Shane, in his practice with words as his medium, has shown architecture some real kindness. And he was right. Kindness does go a long way. Just read how far we've come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emmett. And I think we're all quite moved and speechless here. We were hoping to go straight to a Q&A, but I think we take a little moment. And there are lovely words already flooding in here, saying beautiful words, Emmett, very moving. So I completely agree with that. I mean, Shane, would you like to say something in response to Emmett's launch here?
Well, what I'm dumbstruck, Emmett. I'm so grateful. I'm kind of floored. It's very hard, you know, to respond when people are saying nice things about you. It's much easier when people are saying nasty things about you, because then you get your dander up. But I'm pleased that you. Oh, there was one other interpretation that Frank McDonald had about the book cover and the design of it. You know, because I too, like you, saw them as tiles or a pathway that came together in that design. But Frank McDonald saw it as a keyboard. Being a journalist, but it also has that. It just shows what, you know, wonderful designers like Zero G, like great architects, design layers and layers of meaning into a work, and that's why certain works don't become stale and stay fresh. You were talking about the elegiac aspect of it too, Emmett, and yeah, an elegy, it's not a lament. I wouldn't like anything to be seen as a lament, but it is another definition, is that it's a pensive reflection. And there are times, I think, in life when an elegy is appropriate, when it's called for. I mean, this book was put together during the pandemic. We were losing friends. All of us were losing friends. And I suppose at a certain stage in your life, a little melancholy can creep in. And the fact that I went to Venice to try and finish the book, of course, just made that certain that would definitely happen. But the elegy really, I guess, yes, after 40 years, there's a kind of a disappointment that I would have. That we thought 40 years ago, if we could have imagined the good things that we achieved, we would have thought that we'd have had it cracked. But actually, we're back to square one in so many ways with architecture today, with the housing crisis, with the almost impossibility of young and emerging architects to get significant work, particularly public work. And we must remember that the proof of the last 40 years is that quality in Irish architecture has really emerged through public clients rather than through private clients. That's where the universities and where the urban regeneration, where everything like this came from. So we have to find a way where the public authorities can again have faith in a new generation of architects, because the young have always delivered. you know, from the likes of Paul Korolek at Berkeley Library and Trinity College. You know, I mean, it's a constant story. And Andre Wehert as a 20-something-year-old in UCD with a master plan. So that has to be cracked. And I would think that from the profession's point of view, President Charlotte, I think that's a huge battle that you have to really go to war with for your members, for the future of the profession. And I think also, you know, there's the other thing that saddens me greatly, I think, is the lack of vision in some of our public authorities. I mean, Dublin is a disgrace. I live in Kilkenny for the last 10 years. And when I come up to Dublin, it's a shocker to see the state of the city, the state of the public realm, the neglect, the graffiti, the ridiculous signposting, that's lamp standards that just are blocking the whole city. Nobody is looking after, nobody is loving Dublin, nobody is looking after the city and caring for it. I compare that with Kilkenny, which depends on tourism, and where there is a vision for how the public realm of the city is maintained. And that comes directly from the top, and it works the whole way down through the crew of the local authority. If it can happen in Kilkenny, it can happen in Dublin. So there's an issue there. We've got the wrong people, the wrong vision. We've still got loads of, thankfully, I guess what it means is we've still got loads to do. Lots done, but loads more to do. Sorry for meandering on.
Thank you so much, Shane. And actually, it would be interesting to hear maybe from Charlotte a little bit, because I think, Charlotte, you were quite struck by the topicality of some of the essays in the book on towns and urban regeneration. And I know you've mentioned some of that already in your introduction, but maybe you could mention some of the essays that you were particularly struck by.
Yes, thank you, Sandra, and thank you, Shane, and Emmett as well, for your really thought-provoking words. And it really, I suppose, one of the earlier essays that I read, Dunmanway, which was a really imaginative way of, and I suppose, what would you call it? Yeah, I suppose, you know, the architect really taking on that other role, attending to architecture in another way, you know, as you described earlier, where an imaginative way of placing new housing in the town, which was about bringing life back to the town centre, and that is really important. And I think it really shows I suppose the way in which architects can reimagine how places can be just through some very creative understanding of the place and the manner in which that you can solve that. And I suppose, Shane, it would be interesting to hear your point of view just in terms of that role that the architect can play, particularly in the leadership role that they can take in bringing about this kind of change.
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely important. A lot of it comes down to the personality, I think, not simply the post that somebody occupies in the public service. If you looked at Pat Mcsweeney, who was city architect in Cork back in the 60s. I mean, he was railing against the bureaucrats. He was fighting them tooth and nail to get things done. He wasn't able to last the pace for his whole career to stay in the local authority because it wore him down in the end, and he went out. Neil Hegarty similarly had come from the private sector, went into the public sector, but in a way behaved like an independent consultant within the public sector, you know, and took on responsibilities, personal responsibilities to change things. And he did change West Cork through early schemes like at Dunmanway, where he discovered that a site was being purchased in the middle of town on a CPO by the local authority. And he had been asked to design a housing scheme on the outskirts of town, where he thought that the local tenants would be disadvantaged because they'd have to walk into town they'd be identified as coming from the council estate outside town, and he said they should be in town. And so he grabbed this site, and it was only when he got to first floor level of construction on the houses that somebody said, hey, that site was bought for road widening. And so Neil just took that. It's not enough, you see, to have a county architect or somebody in an executive architect in the local authority. The executive architect sometimes has to maybe stick their neck out. Neil was accused of being unprofessional in that, and then he went to the area manager and he said, look, when I came in, I had no formal induction. You know, I was just told to get on with it. And his line boss said to him, he said, well, sure, if we had induction, we'd have no new ideas at all. And he fired off from there. He changed the whole attitude so that for about 20 years, every housing site that was bought in West Cork was bought in a town. And he designed thousands of houses in the towns of West Cork, putting the cars at the back, keeping the houses on the street. So you can't get that just through a job spec. You have to be able to bring something like that to it. And Jim Barrett, I think, was able to bring something like that to the post of city architect in Limerick. And he sat at the top management table when he came to Dublin. And I'm not sure that sort of level of influence, even though there has been a city architect in years since, exists. So it demands a personality as well as a position. So these are, you talked to Shane de Blockham. There's an interview in the book with Shane de Blockham and John Marr talking about the Cork Institute of Technology Library, you know, which won the RIAI Gold Medal, and how there was a crisis in design there. And it was actually Philip Doyle, who was the monitoring or supervising architect from the Department of Education building unit, who came down and backed the architects when there was a blockage that threatened the whole project. So these architects in local authorities who really believe in what they're doing and believe in the mission of architecture are, I think, the greatest heroes the profession can have. I mean, it's a real job for a hero. And I would encourage architects who don't just want to, you know, be the name tag designer, but want to do some really good work to get into those positions and serve the profession, serve society.
That's a very strong and good plea, Shane, and it's something that the RIAI has consistently asked for, to resource our local authorities more across the whole country, because we can clearly see the evidence of where architects are in charge. And it's interesting, you know, the making of an architecture culture has been mentioned so much by all of our speakers today, and it's interesting to see how Cork County has really managed to do that over the decades, and we see even the fruits of that today in what they're doing. Emmett, would you like to come in here a little bit on that whole topic again of a culture of architecture and how important writing is in that? And of course, you have your own podcast, so listening to words is very much part of that as well.
Yeah, maybe. I'd love to say something about that, Sandra. Thank you. If I could just maybe make a slight connection back to the previous point about, let's call it, public service and public sector architecture. I mean, one thing that is an open door waiting to be pushed, I think, is the fact that education of architecture in Ireland is also part of the public sector. It's not a private enterprise. It's, you know, substantially funded by the state, and those of us who teach there are substantially employed by the state. I think there is an easy thing to do, which is to figure out a way to build a bridge between what is constructed as the public sector architectural world and those institutions, and to invite people to be relieved or seconded from those positions and to teach in our schools. Partly because I think there is a peculiar binary that has been growing, and you know, it's tracked very clearly, for example, in the UK, where private practices escalate and public practice has fallen away. And I think, in fairness to the public sector, it is under immense pressures from all different kinds of places, which also I think maybe not all of us understand. So somehow I think it would be wonderful to have those working in public service and architecture involved in the education of architects. So those, as Shane has championed, and so too has Charlotte and yourself, who might go and operate in those positions into the future, can know that from their first year, that it's a viable and an essential part of architectural culture in Ireland. I mean, I think the question of writing in architecture is so essential. And I guess for me, I've come to think of it less as something that sits in parallel to building practice. But I mean, the way that I read these stories that Shane has written, or these essays, is that they become part of the landscape or understanding or knowledge of what the buildings are, both for the architects. I mean, many of us, including myself, have been on the, let's call it the receiving end in the best sense of a review by Shane. And that starts to inform and I suppose develop our practice, even if sometimes things are placed in front of us that we may not want to hear. And my experience, for example, of talking to emerging architects on the podcast or in interviews or just as colleagues, is that there is an immense hunger for an appraisal of the work, for not people, just saying it's good or bad, but actually trying to place it within some wider context of how we are constructing Ireland, or how we are advancing the culture or architecture, or whether Irish architecture can hold a place against our European or, more widely international global counterparts as architectural practice. And as a small island, I think we can suffer sometimes from getting a critique or a review from people who manage to make work that gets off the island to a certain extent. So I think it's essential, and I think it's something that we should continue to try and support. I mean, and I think it's changing a little bit, just to call out the Irish Architecture Foundation, their kind of recent Emerging Writers program, where they, Shane, I know, was involved, where they sponsored and supported young and actually really exciting writers to review work and to make work and to pay them to do the work, and to treat it as a job and something that's of value to your practice, and that you might build a life and a career in it, as Shane has done. I think those things are really very exciting, and I think we really need to be encouraging it within schools, within practice, that writing builds this culture. Because I think, I use the kind of relationship of the kitchen table. I think that Shane's point that in the essay that Charlotte mentioned is that we don't have a culture of architecture if it's ours alone, if we can't find ways of sharing it or having it influenced or debated, even if we don't always like what's being said, by others. And therefore it's so important that what happens in architecture gets discussed as architecture and gets critiqued as such, beyond, I suppose, our own world.
Thank you, Emmett. I wonder, we've a comment here from Karen Latimer saying, thank you, Shane, for supporting architecture and architectural publishing north of the border as well, and can't wait to get hold of the book. So there have been a couple of questions where people can get hold of the book. So the book has arrived in the RIAI Bookshop, and we are exclusively selling it in Ireland. And we're doing this so that proceeds from the book can go both to the IABS and the Irish Architectural Archive, two charities close to Shane's heart as well. But just following on from Emmett's words here, I wonder, because nobody has had, well, very few of us have had the book in our hands, would it be nice to maybe hear Shane read some words from the book and to hear some of his writing? Shane, would you be up for that? Sorry for putting you on the spot now, but...
Well, I would, Sandra. I mean, I would have done it if we were in a live situation, in person.
Yeah.
One would, but I wasn't sure whether it would work here in this format. But I'm happy to give it a go. So the piece,
fantastic.
The piece I would read is actually the preface to the book, which kind of sets out, I guess, why the book exists. Chiuso. Venice pulled down the shutters the day I decided I should become an architect. The city was full. And then, in a twinkling, La Serenissima turned her head and changed her languid mind. Had word arrived on the wind from Ravenna? No, it came galloping out of the desert, bright and blue-eyed, gliding over parched white sands straight to the Rialto. The matrix clicked. I would never become an archaeologist digging for secrets in Egypt, a once childhood dream. I would become instead, what exactly? A writer, an architect, a traveler, a psychiatrist, perhaps even a lawyer. Whatever it was, I would have Peter O'Toole to thank for it. His performance as Lawrence of Arabia suddenly opened a select door at the car park in Tronchetto. It was early July 1969, days before my 14th birthday, and by trick of familial fate, a name on a passport, I was back on track. There were beds in a pensione by the Bauer Hotel. A night flight by Caravelle had taken us to Rimini, where we picked up a white Fiat 124. By mid-morning in Ravenna, my father had walked me through the thick honeyed glow of alabaster light that bathes the Byzantine mosaics of San Vitale. Before lunch, we stood by the tomb of Dante, whose septicentennial occurs. Then on to Venice, city of stolen stone, with its colourful oriental carpets of tiny marble fragments, Tesserae laid out on the lagoon. 12 hours in which my future was decided. Light, stones, words, I've been building out of them ever since. The siren of the sinking city summoned me back for the umpteenth time in January 2020, between flood, the worst since La Grande Alluvione in 1966, whose tide marks I recall, and pandemic, our new purgatorio. To finish this book in the shadow of Ruskin, I spent a month in winter studying the stones and dreaming in the Fondazione Querini Stampalia, founded in 1869, a century before I first set foot in Venice, and melancholically transformed by Carlo Scarpa, where in the cafe I was always asked, Tessera Querini? Tessera is also the Italian for membership card. Ruskin's name ends in an N, as with many of the early rulers of the Republic. Scarpa means shoe. I walked a lot, shuffling across the floors of silent streets. The pavimenti have survived better than any other surface of element, including Venice's ship-keeled roofs. Nuggets of resistance, dense and precious, enduring through the ages, even when submerged by time. The minute detail of the magnum opus tessellatum, the brilliant when flooded floor of Basilica San Marco, is an inexhaustible source of inspiration for all the carpets that grace the city. Look down, rain, water that comes down, water that comes up, gently pulsing as the tide rises, flooding, heralding the death of the masked city, brings the Tesserae to life. Normal is over. There will be no going back except in memory. Ruskin championed Woodward and Dean, as Frampton did the Graftons. I've been a lazy Boswell to my generation of Johnsons, if always more interested in them than their works. Without them, there would be nothing. Their biographies grew their buildings, a fine-grained history of a few short decades lived by those alive, but which will be lost except for the peaks of achievement to those even of the next generation. Cobalt and gold leave no stories untold. I've stood on Dublin's raw bedrock in 1975, a young archaeological surveyor. I've gazed up to the Tower of Christchurch from the pit of the city's foundation, ground zero in time and space. The past gets filled over literally, buried by the future, but it can be dug up again. Each of these pieces once formed a fragile fragment of a greater image slowly emerging, largely out of sight, into an uncertain vision of an epoch. This mini Decameron, this little book of humanity, written into the hardened stones of architecture while in the grip of plague, is what I saw only in glimpses back then, captured as best I could for posterity in plain words, should the future ever again wish to be curious about such olden days and what it was we made and why. Sing in me, O Muse, and through me tell the story.
Bravo, Shane, that was wonderful. Wonderful to hear from the book in your own voice. So we're really glad you did that. There's a lovely comment here from Carol Pollard, who says, on behalf of everyone at Irish Architects Benevolent Society, grateful thanks to Shane for his generosity in enabling our work, such a lovely and touching gesture. So thank you, Shane, for that. Shane, I always wanted to ask you as well about the relationship you've had with Karl Krämer Verlag in Stuttgart, and a lovely tribute there earlier to your publisher in German, which maybe some of us could understand, but I understand you've had lovely evenings together and meals and wine and the odd cigarette as well. So that was a lovely, lovely tribute there. But Karl Krämer Verlag, of course, is a very important German publisher with a long history in the publication of architecture, and in particular early modernism, founded in 1920 by Dr. Fritz Wedekind. They published in 1927 a book on the two houses by Le Corbusier in the Waisenhof-Siedlung in Stuttgart. So you were obviously very, very familiar with all of that, but how did you forge your friendship with Karl? That maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yes. I mean, he has been like a kind of a, I think I said in German, my uncle in architecture. We met nearly 30 years ago when I was working for Tegel, because Karl Kramer Verlag was the publisher of A+D magazine, based in Stuttgart, where the Weißenhof-Siedlung is. And so we used to meet annually in Stuttgart and then annually somewhere else in Europe. Karl always hosted wonderful dinners. While I smoked a cigarette, he smoked a cigar. But he's a really wonderful, generous, kind man who met his father. His father was also Karl Kramer, so his father owned the business before, and he had worked with Akademischer Verlag Dr. Fritz Wedekind, which was the forerunner of Karl Kramer Verlag. So it's a long history of publishing in Stuttgart and in Zurich, where he was based for many years. So we know each other for 30 years. We've been seeing each other every year until this awful pandemic came. But I'm completely honored by him that he would publish my words, because it does connect my words and Irish architecture back to the actual foundations of the modern movement. Because that 1927 book by Alfred Roth, the Zwei Wohnhäuser, which is the two housing schemes by Le Corbusier at the Weißenhof, is where Le Corbusier's 5 points of modern architecture were first published. Yeah, I love Karl Kramer. So he's a wonderful man. He's recovering from illness at the moment. He's not a young man anymore, but a huge support and a huge influence on me.
Thank you, Shane. We send also our warmest wishes and eine gute Besserung. Yeah.
But he knew.
You wanted to say something?
I wanted to say that when he was younger, in the 50s and 60s, through Hans Giersberger, the Le Corbusier publisher in Zurich, he got to know Le Corbusier, Alvar Aalto, and so many of these great architects of the modern movement. So it's wonderful to feel, that story about the 6 removes of connection. You're only a handshake away from the hand that shook Le Corbusier's. It's an architecture
absolutely and
thing, and those connections actually, I mean, I'm emotional about them, but they are emotional, and it's a living thing, architectural culture.
Absolutely. Now we've got a few comments in, and some I will read out here. So Sean Mahan is saying, thank you to Shane for yet again shining a light on the landscape of architecture in Ireland. It's always a pleasure to listen to you weaving a web between your knowledge of history and the present, and in the process challenging us all in such a positive way to do more, and always in the interest of architecture. Thank you also much for your very generous donations from the book to the IABS. And column from the archive is also saying a big thank you for the donations going to the Architectural Archive. Jim Cody is saying we are all pressing the applause button to Shane for his devotion to architecture and to his and Emmett's call for architects to be employed in the public service. And Hugh Campbell has posted a very interesting question. First of all, he's saying congratulations to Shane on another volume, and to Emmett for eloquent words in launching it. Great to hear writing on architecture, writing as an integral part of architecture being celebrated. But here's this interesting question. What do you want to write about next, Shane?
Well, I've more or less started. There's one pretty full bookshelf just behind me here, just a row of books, and they're all my secondary reading for the project I'm embarking on at the moment. But the research is all done. It's a long overdue biography of Noel and Margot Moffat, who were avant-garde architects and figures in the cultural life of Dublin during World War II, during the emergency here in the 1940s. And I'm struggling at the moment to find how to write it. I think it's going to be more novelistic than a traditional history. I mean, I've spent 30 years doing the research. You know, I knew Noel. I met Noel in 1989 in Krakow at the Krakow Biennale, and visited him later in London. And when he was killed by a motorbike, knocking him down in London in 1994, and in the year after that, his wife Alina was suffering from cancer. She made me promise to write this book. So that's my task now for the next 2 years, and I'll be a happy man if I can get all that done. That's the full extent of my desires at this stage. I've got a working title. And the working title is Those Magnificent Moths with Their Modernist Dreams. So.
That sounds wonderful. Absolutely. Well, there's lots more lovely comments coming in here. People have really enjoyed this launch, you know, deeply inspiring and moving, wonderful event. And I'm told the books are heading north on the train today, Shane. So this is from Fort Clark. So that's great too. Before we close, would Charlotte and Emmett, would you like to come in for any final thoughts?
Sandra, if I could
maybe.
just, I mean, really to endorse the idea of architects' place in the public service, and it's absolutely essential, and it is something that we call for consistently, because it is through having architecture and architects embedded within the local authority sector, but also at all levels, that we can really bring this becomes a critical or a key area, and it becomes, I suppose, if we have the local authority with this conversation, that it does become a conversation that can happen around the kitchen table, as Emmett said, and it is really that level of collaboration too that we can bring with the other disciplines to bring about greater, much better placemaking in places. Thank you.
Thank you. And Emmett, would you like to come in?
No, I'd just like to congratulate maybe Shane again on what's a remarkable body of work, and it's wonderful to hear that it's continuing. I'd encourage everyone to buy the book, and as John Toome used to say, buy two, and give one away, because I think what's wonderful about it is that it is a kind of inclusive tome. I think it's, Shane just illustrated so beautifully there when he read about how he situates architecture, which sometimes feels remote and distant and complex, in ordinary life, in drinking cups of tea and understanding your place, physical, emotional, and intellectual place in the world. So buy it and share it and spread it up north, west, east, everywhere. Thank you, Shane.
Well, thank you all. I'm just a mess of gloop here at the moment, so.
Oh. That's the one time now I wish we would be in person, because we could give you a big hug from all of us, you know, and lots of applause. So there's been a wonderful reaction, and a huge thanks to Shane, you know, for bringing this book to us and for publishing it. And it's going to be a steady companion, and it's definitely, I think, Shane, I hope that's okay to say, you don't have to read it cover to cover. You can kind of like, I sort of delve into it and see what do I fancy this morning, and then all of these little stories come together and build up the picture eventually. So thank you, and thank you to Charlotte and Emmett for putting so much thought into their responses on the book, and again for, you know, bringing it to us, because, as I said, very few people have it at the moment. It's in the bookshop, so come and get it. And I hope you will find the talks today about the book helpful in your reading of the book. And there's a lovely comment here as well from Ellen Rowley. I might close with that. She says herself also a very good writer on architecture. Congratulations to Shane, and thank you for the ongoing inspiration and example you set. We're all so lucky to have you. Most recently, you so generously shared the story of the making of the Killinere, County Louth autocross for the 1979 papal visit with our final year student in UCD, Cara Jordan. Looking forward to the new read. Well, here's to more books by Shane O'Toole. And best of luck with the new book, Shane. And thank you again. And thank you everybody for at some point, I mean, we were well over 100, but we kept hovering around the 99 figure as well. And I thought there was serendipity in that as well, that our audience and the number of stories aligned. But people, many came to the launch today, and thank you all for giving up your lunch hour and coming to this book launch. And we hope to see everybody soon in the RIAI again. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Thank you so much.